January 1945, Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and FDR met in Yalta, Ukraine to discuss post-World War II policies around the world. Stalin wanted to influence communism throughout Russia's occupied countries, while FDR and Churchill began to believe communism was trying to take over the world economically and politically, by fair means or foul. This ultimately was the beginning of tensions for the Cold War.
After the Allied forces captured Berlin and ended the war, the capital was split between Communist East and Democratic West. The capital itself was centered in the middle of the Communist territory and was centered around conflicting powers. Initially, Germany was demilitarized by the Allied powers, but after the war was done, America wanted to build up the military again under strict control to help stop Russia's expansionism. Russia saw this and began the Berlin blockade. All road and railways were cut off and the Allies had no means of getting supplies to Berlin. In response, an American airlift began to ship supplies to the western half. This airlift lasted around 11 months before the Russians ended the blockade.
NATO was created in 1949 and the Warsaw Pact was created in 1955. NATO had democratic, capitalist nations while the Warsaw Pact had totalitarian, communist countries. This clash of beliefs led to future years of conflict between the two groups. No actual warfare had occurred yet and tensions were already high.
The Cold War suddenly turned hot in Korea. The United Nations implemented a police action to help democratic South Korea hold off an invasion of North Korea. By September of 1950, UN forces had landed in South Korea and began fighting to push back North Korea. While the UN was backing South Korea, China and the Soviet Union were helping North Korea. The fight resulted in a stalemate at the 38th parallel.
America had ended World War II with atomic bombs in Japan, which made the US the most powerful nation in the world. In a mere 3 years, Russia had developed their own bomb. Espionage was expected and the Red Scare in the US began. Hydrogen bomb in the US was created in 1952 and the Russians' hydrogen bomb 1 year later. The arms race hit its highest point once the Russians launched Sputnik in 1957. People believed that Russians could launch missiles from space, so the US began their own space race. In 1963, US and Russia ratified the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty to stop all nuclear testing in space, land, and water. By 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon, ultimately winning the space race for the US.
In 1961, Cuban and American tensions heightened when 1,300 Cuban exiles with American weapons invaded the Bay of Pigs in a political coup attempting to overthrow Fidel Castro's government. The attack was a massive failure with 90 of the exiles were killed and the others were taken prisoners. 1 year later, American U-2 spy planes took photographs of the Russian IBMs in Cuba in what would later be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was only ended when a treaty between Russia and the US pulled all American missiles out of Turkey and all Russian missiles were removed from Cuba. This put a huge strain on Cuba's and Russia's relationship, and it would never recover.
The Vietnam War began in 1955 and started 20 years of conflict, what is known as the bloodiest war in US history. It was a war to stop the spread of communism in Asia. The war was between communist North Vietnam against anti-communist South Vietnam, with each backed by their supportive countries. The war was a long stalemate at the 17th parallel. It came to an end in 1975 with the fall of the last US base at Saigon.
In 1978, a conflict occurred between anti-communist guerrilla warfare Arabs and Russian-supported communist Arabs. In 1973, the Arab president was assassinated and a pro-Soviet communist government was established. The US got involved and helped slow down the communist Arabs. The war came to an end when Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev pulled all USSR troops out of Afghanistan. Most view it as Russia's Vietnam War.
The end of the Cold War was marked by Russia's withdrawal from Afghanistan. In 1989, the Berlin Wall was dismantled, ending the separation between the two conflicting sides. Boris Yeltsin became president of Russia, and the Soviet Union fell, ending the Cold War in 1991.